If you've ever spent big money on a winter tent and still woke up cold, here's the uncomfortable truth. Most tents don't make heat. They just slow down how fast you lose it. People who sleep outside in real winter conditions learned a simple, cheap way to beat that problem using basic physics. No fancy materials, no marketing, just smarter airflow and insulation. In this video, I'm breaking down the $30 setup that can outperform a $300 single-wall tent in the cold, why it works, and how to copy the concept safely without doing anything risky inside your shelter. Let's start with the one thing expensive gear can't ignore: heat loss. Number 1. Dead air space. A cheap tent is basically a wind shell. It blocks rain and some wind, but it doesn't make heat. In cold weather, one of the quickest ways you lose warmth is when moving air strips away the thin, warm layer your body creates around you. That's convection. Cold air keeps replacing the slightly warmer air you just made, so your body has to keep paying calories to rewarm it. This is also why wind chill is mainly a speed problem. It doesn't freeze objects to a new temperature, it just pulls heat away faster. Premium winter tents beat this by using two walls with an air gap between them, similar to double-pane windows. That trapped still air is the insulation. The low-cost hack is copying the same idea with whatever you can get cheaply: two mismatched tents, a tent plus an outer tarp, or a basic tent plus a second loose fly. If you can get two cheap shelters, set up a smaller tent inside a larger one so there's a clear gap between the fabrics. You're not stacking for thickness, you're building an invisible buffer zone. If the inner tent touches the outer layer, you create cold bridges where heat transfers straight through, so the goal is separate but close. A gap about the width of your hand up to roughly your forearm is usually enough to stop drafts while still keeping the whole setup stable.
Use extra tie-outs or a few short cords to keep the outer layer taut so wind can't push it onto the inner wall. If you don't have two tents, build an outer skin with a tarp. Hang the tarp outside your tent so there's a gap, not a direct wrap. When fabric touches fabric, you lose the dead air space, and you can trap moisture against your tent. The outer layer should take the wind and precipitation, and the inner tent should stay calmer and drier. Think of the outer piece as a windshield, and the inner tent as your actual room. Placement matters too. Even a solid setup loses if you put it in a wind tunnel. Look for natural shelter like a fence, a wall, thick bushes, or a small rise in the ground. Avoid the lowest point in an area because cold air settles like water and small dips can run colder than you expect. Slightly higher and drier is usually better. Once the wind is handled and you've created that dead air space, comfort starts coming down to one simple question. How much air are you trying to heat with one human body? Number 2. Smaller warm zone. A big tent feels nice in summer, but in the cold it's like trying to warm a warehouse with a desk heater. Your body can only warm a small pocket of air, so the smartest move is to build a smaller room inside the room. That's a big part of why people who sleep outside in winter often look like they're nesting. They're shrinking the space their heat has to fill. You can do the same thing without buying specialty gear. Run a line across the tent and hang a sheet, a cheap fleece blanket, a poncho liner, or even a spare tarp to create a low ceiling over the sleeping area. The goal isn't to seal yourself in, it's to bring the ceiling down so your warm air isn't collecting 2 feet above your head where it does nothing for you. Keep the fabric well away from your face and leave a path for fresh air to move, but reduce the overall volume. Another easy trick is using your own gear as a wind baffle. Put your backpack, spare clothes bag, or even a stuffed trash bag of soft items on the windward side inside the tent. It's not insulation, but it slows drafts and keeps the coldest air from washing over your sleeping setup. If your tent has a big door panel, hanging a simple curtain just inside the entrance can reduce that blast of cold air when the zipper isn't perfect. Also, watch where your sleeping bag touches the tent walls. In cold weather, the walls collect moisture from your breath and from humidity inside the tent. If your bag presses against a wet wall, it soaks up water and loses loft. And wet loft is almost the same as no loft. Keeping a little clearance, just a few inches, protects your insulation. Once you've reduced wind and shrunk the space, the next upgrade is dealing with the kind of heat loss most people never think about, because you can't feel it the way you feel a draft.
Number 3. Reflective ceiling. Heat doesn't only leave through air movement. Your body also loses heat by radiation, basically infrared energy leaving your skin and your sleeping bag. A thin nylon roof doesn't stop much of that. A reflective surface can bounce some of that radiant heat back toward you, but only if you use it like a barrier, not like shrink wrap. The simple move is clipping a reflective emergency blanket or a reflective windshield sunshade under the tent's ceiling, right above the sleeping zone. Shiny side facing down toward you. The key detail is leaving a small gap between the reflector and the cold tent fabric. If you press the reflective sheet directly against the tent, it stops acting like a radiant barrier and starts acting like a cold conductor. That small air gap keeps the physics working in your favor. Keep it practical. Cover the area above your torso and shoulders first, because that's where most heat is coming from. You don't need to line the entire tent to get a real effect, and covering everything can make condensation worse. A partial ceiling panel gives you a warmer pocket while still letting moisture escape through vents. There's also a side benefit: condensation control. When warm, humid air hits a cold tent wall, water forms and can drip. A hanging liner can catch drips before they reach your sleeping bag. In the morning, you can shake it out or wipe it down and keep the rest of your gear drier. If noise matters, fold the reflective sheet once, or pair it with a thin cloth layer so it doesn't crinkle every time you move. Once the roof is handled, you've covered wind, volume, and radiation. But the biggest heat thief is still waiting below you. Number 4. Ground insulation first. The ground is a massive heat sink. Air might feel colder, but frozen earth can pull heat out of you by conduction non-stop. And a sleeping bag doesn't save you underneath, because the insulation gets crushed flat under your weight.
No loft means almost no insulation. That's why a pad is often more important than an expensive bag in cold setups. If you don't have a real sleeping pad, your job is to stack dry layers that trap air and resist getting compressed. Corrugated cardboard is popular because the little channels hold air, and a few layers can make a noticeable difference. Packaging foam, cheap closed-cell exercise mats, carpet remnants, and flattened bubble insulation panels all work on the same principle. Trapped air, not the material itself, is doing the insulating. If you're using soft layers like clothing or blankets, put them on top of something that spreads your weight, because soft stuff compresses and loses its air pockets. Moisture is the enemy here. Wet cardboard turns into a cold sponge, and wet fabric loses insulation fast. Start with a ground sheet under everything, like a tarp or heavy plastic, to stop ground moisture. Then build your insulation stack. If your insulating layer is something that hates water, like cardboard, protect it with a thin plastic barrier above it as well. Then put your pad or blanket on top. The point is to keep the air-trapping layers dry through the night. If you can get off the ground at all, do it. Even a few inches helps because it reduces direct contact with frozen earth. In an emergency, that could be as simple as a thick pile of dry leaves in bags, a folded foam panel, or a low platform made from safe, stable materials. The exact method changes, but the rule stays the same. Don't let your insulation get crushed, and don't let it get wet. Once the floor is solid, the next issue is the thing that quietly ruins most cold weather nights: moisture building up inside the shelter.
Number 5. Moisture and venting. Warm and wet is a trap, because wet turns into cold fast. Your breath carries moisture, your body sweats even when you don't notice, and your shelter collects that water on cold fabric. When that moisture gets into your insulation, the air pockets collapse, and you lose the insulation you worked to build. So you need two things that sound like opposites: better insulation and controlled ventilation. Controlled ventilation means you leave small openings that let humid air escape without turning your tent into a wind tunnel. If your tent has a high vent, use it, because warm, humid air rises. If it doesn't, cracking the zipper a small amount near the top can help. The goal is airflow that's slow and steady. Sealing everything tight usually backfires. The air gets humid, your gear gets damp, and you wake up colder. Manage your own moisture, too. Don't go to bed in the layers you wore while working or setting up if they're damp. Even a little sweat is trouble in freezing temps. A beginner-friendly rule is keep one dry base layer for sleep if you can. Change socks before bed and avoid anything that's tight enough to cut circulation. If your feet sweat a lot, a vapor barrier setup can keep insulation dry. Thin liner sock, then a loose plastic bag, then an insulating sock. But it's not comfortable for everyone, and you should dry your feet and socks as soon as you can the next day. One more small habit helps a lot. Keep your sleeping bag and clothing away from tent walls, and wipe down condensation when you can. A small cloth or towel weighs almost nothing and can save your insulation. Once moisture is under control, you can finally use your body heat efficiently instead of wasting it on fighting damp gear. Number 6. Core heat management. A shelter hack is only half the battle. Your body is the heater. The goal is keeping your core warm so warm blood can carry heat to your hands and feet. Start with coverage. Head and neck are high-loss areas. A beanie plus a neck gaiter does a lot, and a balaclava can help as long as you can breathe comfortably and you're not trapping too much moisture around your mouth. Mittens usually beat gloves in real cold because your fingers share warmth instead of being separated. Then look at fit and layering. Loose layers trap more air than tight layers, and trapped air is the insulation. If your socks or gloves are so tight they squeeze, you'll feel colder even with more material. A simple setup is a dry base layer, an insulating mid-layer, and a wind-blocking outer layer. But the big rule is staying dry and not compressing your insulation. For low-cost heat boosting, warm the core on purpose instead of trying to heat the entire tent. A hot water bottle is one of the safest tools when used responsibly. Use hot tap water, not boiling. Make sure the cap seals, and keep it in a sock or wrapped in cloth. Placing it near your inner thighs or against your lower abdomen warms blood flowing through big vessels, and that heat gets carried out to your hands and feet. Chemical hand warmers work similarly, but treat them like a tool. Follow the directions. Don't put them directly on skin, and keep a cloth layer between the warmer and your body to avoid burns. Food is part of heat management too.
Your body makes heat when it digests food. A small, steady snack before sleep can help more than people expect, especially something that digests slowly, like oats, rice, pasta, peanut butter, or nuts. Sugary snacks can spike and crash, which isn't great if you're trying to stay warm for hours. Hydration matters as well, because dehydration messes with circulation. But avoid chugging a ton of water right before sleep if it will force you up repeatedly. This is the point where a lot of people start looking for extra heat sources, and that's where the biggest mistakes happen.
Number 7. Safe heat only. Cold makes people reach for quick fixes, and the most dangerous quick fix is burning fuel inside a small shelter. Anything that burns, stoves, grills, propane heaters, charcoal, can produce carbon monoxide and also uses up oxygen. Carbon monoxide has no smell and no warning. The safe rule for a tent is simple. Don't run fuel-burning gear inside it. Cook outside, let fumes stay outside, and bring the food in after. Open flames bring a second risk: fire. Candles and DIY mini heaters sound clever, but a small flame near nylon, sleeping bags, and tired people is a bad mix. Even if nothing catches, melted fabric and smoke can ruin gear fast. If warmth is the goal, stick to non-flame options: hot water bottles, chemical warmers, better insulation, or electric heat that's designed for the purpose. Battery heat can be useful if you already have a power bank and you use devices meant for close contact, like a low-voltage heated pad or blanket. Keep it simple. Follow the manufacturer instructions. Don't bunch it up, and don't cover the power bank in a way that makes it overheat. The safer mindset is: reduce heat loss first, add gentle heat second. Once you cut wind, insulate the floor, and stay dry, you need much less added heat to be comfortable. With that in mind, building a cheap winter system becomes less about buying a miracle item and more about covering the basics with a repeatable setup. Number 8. The $30 Winter Kit. If you already own any basic tent, you can upgrade the weak points with a handful of low-cost pieces. Think in layers, because layers are what premium gear is selling you. For wind, a cheap tarp and a little cord so you can hang it with an air gap as an outer wall. For the roof, one reflective blanket or sunshade clipped under the ceiling above the sleeping zone with a small gap so it isn't glued to the cold fabric. For the ground, a ground sheet plus a thick, dry insulating stack, cardboard, foam panels, or a budget closed-cell mat. Add a few clips or binder clips because they make it easy to hang liners and reflective panels without tearing fabric. If you can afford one real item, make it a basic sleeping pad because it upgrades every sleep system you'll ever use. Then run the same routine every time. Set the shelter where wind is already reduced. Point the door away from the wind, and keep the setup tight and low so it doesn't act like a sail. Lay the ground sheet, build the insulation stack, and set your sleeping area so the bag won't touch the walls. Hang the reflective panel and any inner ceiling so the warm pocket sits where you actually sleep. Leave a small vent path for humid air to escape. Before bed, change into dry layers, warm a bottle if you can, and eat something that burns slow. In the morning, air out the bag and liner so yesterday's moisture doesn't become tonight's cold. Store this kit together in a tote so it's grab and go for a winter power outage, a car breakdown, or any situation where staying warm is suddenly not optional.